throw out the rulebook, rip up the form book, because now that Formula One has shown us what the 2026 cars are going to look like, the conversation has shifted fast. We know this is the biggest regulation change in more than a decade. We know the cars will be smaller, lighter, and far more complex to drive. But here's the part that really matters. What kind of driver does this era actually reward? Is it the fastest driver, or the one who understands what the car is asking for? Because 75 years of innovation doesn't just change the machinery, it changes who survives. And in 2026, the job description behind the wheel looks very different. So let's get straight to the question everyone's asking. Which F1 drivers will thrive under the 2026 regulations? Based on what we know from the FIA's technical framework, Formula One's own explanations, and how drivers have historically handled major regulation resets, the drivers best positioned for 2026 aren't defined by aggression or raw speed alone. They're defined by how they process complexity while the car is moving underneath them. That immediately puts names like Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, George Russell, and drivers with proven adaptability like Max Verstappen at the centre of the conversation, not as opinions or hot takes, as consequences of what the rules will actually reward. So what do these drivers have in common, and why does it matter now? At first glance, the 2026 car looks like a visual reset more than anything else. Shorter wheelbases, narrower bodies, lighter weight, simplified wings, flatter floors, and far less reliance on ground effect, all combine to change how these cars behave. Downforce drops, movement increases, and suddenly the car feels alive again instead of locked to the road. Same power, less grip, and that combination has always been a truth serum in Formula One. Whenever grip disappears, the car stops flattering the driver and starts exposing habits. And when the car stops hiding mistakes, who actually benefits? Slides don't vanish instantly anymore. Corrections cost time across multiple corners, and overdriving stops being forgiven by aero. You can't lean on confidence alone. You have to manage balance lap after lap. Drivers who rely on a perfectly planted platform suddenly have less margin to work with, while drivers comfortable negotiating with an imperfect car quietly gain one. That's why Lando Norris fits this era so naturally, because his strength has never been overpowering the car, but extracting performance without overwhelming it. It's also why George Russell's reputation for control in difficult machinery becomes more relevant than ever, because these cars reward precision, restraint, and timing rather than constant commitment. But grip is only half the story, and honestly, it might not even be the most important half. What if driving fast isn't the hardest part anymore? What if deciding when to be fast matters more? The defining change of 2026 is what the driver is responsible for while the car is in motion. Active aerodynamics mean the car behaves differently depending on where you are on the lap, with corner mode prioritizing grip and straight mode reducing drag. Energy deployment isn't automatic anymore. Boost, overtake, and recharge are all decisions, not defaults. Lap time becomes strategic, not just mechanical. This isn't about pushing harder or being braver on the brakes. It's about choosing better moments, better places, and better compromises. That's where drivers like Oscar Piastri quietly become fascinating, because his calmness under complexity and ability to absorb information quickly line up perfectly with a car that demands constant decision-making. In 2026, the fastest drivers won't look dramatic or chaotic from the outside. They'll look deliberate, almost boring, until you check the lap time. Now zoom out slightly, because overtaking itself changes character in this new era. Cleaner airflow, reduced outwash, and simplified aero mean following another car through corners should be easier than it's been in years. That's great for racing, but it also removes a layer of protection drivers have relied on. When you can follow closely, every weakness becomes visible faster. So do you attack now or set something up for later? Overtakes stop being about bravery and start being about inevitability. Drivers who thrive here aren't diving at half gaps. They're forcing the car ahead into bad choices, draining battery, and waiting for the math to work. This is racecraft in its purest form, and it's why drivers who look patient on TV are actually doing the most work. Norris, Piastri, and Russell don't need to win this corner. They're thinking about the next 5, and that mindset fits 2026 perfectly. Then there's adaptability, the hardest skill to quantify and maybe the most important of all. What happens when the fastest driver isn't the most adaptable one? Some drivers succeed in one regulation era and struggle in the next, while a rare few manage to survive multiple resets. That's why Max Verstappen remains firmly part of this conversation. Not because dominance magically carries over, but because adaptability does. He's already rewritten his driving style across completely different car philosophies, from high-rate designs to ground effect monsters. Drivers who've rebuilt their approach once don't panic, they recalibrate. And we can't talk about 2026 without addressing one of the biggest names in the sport. Lewis Hamilton enters this era with more experience across regulation changes than almost anyone on the grid, and that still matters. His strengths, tyre management, race reading, and feeling the rear of the car absolutely translate to a lower grip world. But 2026 also increases cognitive load, system management, and constant variability, which demands adjustment rather than muscle memory. The outcome isn't predetermined, but the challenge is real. That brings us to Charles Leclerc, whose skill set sits right on the fault line of this regulation change. Leclerc has always been highly sensitive to car behaviour, especially at the limit, and in a lower downforce world with more movement, that sensitivity becomes an asset. These cars will reward drivers who feel balance shifts early rather than react late, and that's something Leclerc has always done instinctively. If the car allows him to lean on feel rather than fight instability, his style aligns neatly with what 2026 demands. And that idea of feel over force doesn't stop there, because it shows up again in a very different way with Fernando Alonso, who somehow keeps finding himself relevant every time Formula One reinvents itself. What Alonso brings into 2026 isn't raw speed, it's clarity. He understands how to manage races when grip is limited, when patience matters more than lap time, and when losing a tenth now sets up something bigger later. In a regulation era built around timing, options, and energy management, that experience doesn't fade, it compounds. There's also a generational angle quietly shaping this grid. Drivers entering or settling into their prime around 2026 won't be unlearning ground effect habits. Active aero and energy management will simply be their baseline. Managing deployment modes won't feel like extra work, it'll feel normal. That doesn't guarantee success, but it accelerates adaptation. This is why younger drivers and rookies arriving around this era could surprise people, not with raw speed, but with how quickly everything clicks. Then there's a wildcard fans keep circling back to, and it's a fascinating one. Valtteri Bottas, in a 2026 context, suddenly makes more sense than it would have a few years ago. His strengths have always been clarity, smooth execution, and efficiency, rather than chaos or aggression. If the new cars truly offer a wider setup window and reward clean energy usage, that driving style becomes more valuable than it's been in years. It wouldn't be a fairy tale comeback, it would be a situationally logical one. Of course, not every profile benefits equally from this shift, and that's the uncomfortable truth of every regulation reset. Drivers who rely heavily on peak downforce confidence, ultra-aggressive corner entries, or instinct-first driving may find these cars more demanding. Less grip means fewer second chances. More systems mean more ways to be slightly wrong. Cleaner airflow means fewer excuses. That doesn't mean anyone suddenly becomes bad. It just means the margin they used to live in disappears. So when the 2026 season begins, expect something subtle but powerful to unfold. Expect fewer headline-grabbing mistakes, but more quiet separation across stints and race distances. Expect some drivers to look instantly comfortable, not because the car suits them perfectly, but because they're comfortable when it doesn't. Expect others to look fast yet inconsistent, searching for something that no longer exists, not because they're worse drivers, but because the sport moved. And that's the real story of 2026, beyond the wings, the batteries, or the lap times. Formula One is redefining what it asks from the person in the cockpit. This era will reward drivers who balance aggression with restraint, instinct with planning, and speed with understanding. And the drivers who treat a lap like a system rather than a series of corners, those will be the ones who thrive. So when you're watching next season, don't just follow the leaderboard. Watch who looks comfortable when the car isn't. Watch who's still managing energy deep into a stint, and who's already thinking a lap ahead instead of a corner ahead. So when the results start coming in, will we really be surprised? Formula One didn't just change the car, it changed the criteria. And hey, if you enjoyed this breakdown and want more Formula One explained the easy way, hit subscribe. We'll keep making the fastest sport on earth simple, clear, and fun.